So this is a very dreamy, I don't know whether it's sinister. Well, this is an interesting use of photography because it raises a lot of questions about how we think about the photographic image, how we think about sexual imagery, whether this is an image about sex or whether this is an image about a kind of displacement or a kind of inability to focus or a vertigo of some kind. Maybe it's a vertigo caused by images themselves. Maybe this is the flickering image of ourselves that we see mirrored back to us in all the strange jumbotrons and billboards and flickering lights. Maybe this is about the transience of the image. It just raises a lot of interesting questions. Mm-hmm. And this work got an award in the exhibition because the jurors, in a way, had more speculation about this than some of the other images. They weren't sure what this was saying about what images can communicate. Sorry. So it was very interesting to them. This is a work by a Russian artist who's lived in the United States, both of these works are his, for about 15 years. And the jurors were very interested in these works. Principally, this work on the left, and the jurors wrote extensively about it in the catalog because it almost seemed to be a kind of archetypal print image. These are really scratches and stains and little abrasions and little distress marks from almost what appears to be the back of an etching plate that could maybe present a more refined, clarified image. One juror was saying that this is almost like the print turning its back on us, and yet we have an image that seems to flicker like little, maybe not stars, but little notations in an infinite field of sky. And it has the resonance of a work that's strangely contemporary, and yet it could be rubbing from, you know, the wall of the caves of Lascaux where the first printed images showed up. So it's new, but it's not. It has, again, interestingly enough, a kind of primal surface, but then that kind of unusual separation of the two halves, and that the imposed angle, very consciously imposed, that just pulls this out of kind of stable rectangle so that there's a funny kind of tension that seems to pull and push across that flat surface and activate some of the very shallow spaces that are latent in the images. So where some of the other images seem to be, you know, very exciting and very quick to digest, this image keeps bringing people back, wondering what is it trying to say, and what is here as language, and what has been placed here to suggest language, left for us to unravel.
It seems sort of interesting, and maybe it's sort of rather fitting that the artists whose medium has sort of drawn from dissemination of information come to appreciate something that doesn't disseminate it so easily, doesn't sort of let you just directly pick it up.
Isn't that true of everything? I mean, you know, we all like the music that's easy to get to. We like the food that's quick to eat. But as we become more familiar with things, we are able to relax into the experience, I think. It's not that we become students of it, it's just that we become more patient with it, I think. If you watch a lot of films, you start to notice the ones that are saying the same thing over and over. You don't pay much attention to those parts. You look for the things that are fresh. And when you look for the things that are fresh, they don't have to be loud. They don't have to be big. Sometimes they're the subtle things, the things that are easily missed. Maybe they're the things you see when you look at the film 10 times or the painting 100 times. And so when people talk about connoisseurship, I always think that's a funny word. Intimacy might be better. If we really understand a piece of music, we become emotionally intimate with it, and in that closeness, we're able to find nuances of meaning, which aren't effete. They're not about being a specialist. It's just about being attentive. giving it that time so you can be like knowing somebody for a long time. And suddenly when they shift their weight from one foot to another, you know it means they're thinking a certain thing. So I think that interest in image is a product of a patient engagement with the complexity of imagery. Brings up an interesting point. So we're caught between two kind of temporal experiences in contemporary imaging life. One is that all the images are going by so quickly that we read all of them in a blink. We start to detect a kind of rhythm or cadence in their passage, and we start to read everything like that. It's like coming out of listening to music and coming out and you're snapping your figures, and the birds fly at the same rhythm and people talk at the same rhythm. As long as you can keep that groove, everything conforms to that groove mechanically. That can be a liability, because if we start to look at our image landscape in that kind of nonchalant way, we're going to miss the fact that some images are images that do this, and there's some images that really don't have that kind of durational charge. Mm-hmm. They're images that need us to just sit in front of them for a while until we find that kind of inner rhythm, and until they're able to readjust our inner rhythm, I think. And that goes back to that original point that's the thread of this conversation, I think, is mm-hmm. that film will draw us into certain questions in a certain rhythm. Right. Prints will draw us into, ceramic sculpture will draw us into. So I really, and this is very personal, I understand, believe me, but I really think that one of the keys to understanding the complexity of the image culture around us is to remember that just because they're all objects, it doesn't mean they're all the same kind of time. And it doesn't mean we should experience them in the same kind of way. So we have to learn how to set ourselves up to get certain kinds of experiences and be willing to do that. In about 1980, I brought a very famous Japanese artist to Canada to help teach a spring course. And when he landed in customs in Vancouver, they asked him what his profession was, and they had a list of, a teacher, lawyer, doctor, so on. And he crossed those out and put artist in. And they denied him entry into the country because on that list at that time, artist was not considered a profession. So 2 years later, I went to Japan. Now, I happen to have learned that the Japanese word for print was hanga. So when I went through the customs line, they asked me verbally, and what's your profession? Now, I didn't say I was a hanga artist. I just said hanga. 3 people bowed. So when we talk about printmaking traditions, we talk about deep cultural awareness of a vital form that adds to the knowledge of the community. It would be like going to a country and saying, do you want to go to a movie? And they say, what's that? Right. I mean, sometimes if you say, what's a print to a Canadian, they can't answer that. There's a lot of historical reasons for that, which we don't have time to go into, but we have a small, vital printmaking community in Canada. And our survival and our healthy survival has depended on the fact that I think we live in a multicultural society, and we have certain advantages being geographically isolated. So we have to look outside. We have to be like filmmakers. We have to be making a film in LA, but we have to be aware of what's going on in Paris. Through shows like this, we take it on ourselves to know about what's happening around the world. So even though we're Canadians in a culture that doesn't have a tradition of printmaking, doesn't teach about printmaking in schools, and doesn't promote it much in the media, artists who are interested in printmaking, who see in printmaking a way to talk about the ideas they really need to express, the possibility of reaching out to other countries who have that tradition and joining with them across thousands of miles. And it's possible to have a very thriving community as far away as we are.